Myself and Ms. Manik Chan, in which I made some comments. I have since reviewed the series of events on video, both leading up to the exchange and after. And also I have taken into account the comments made by Mr. Sharma, who again is not here today, who was here yesterday, and the statement made by the Honourable Minister yesterday to the House. And as a result, I have determined that I will not be hindering Ms. Manik Chan's right to address the House if she so desires. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I, on behalf of APNU, wish to respect your ruling, but I want to point out, sir, that according to the Hansard, and I want to read something from the Hansard, which was said by Ms. Manik Chan, Honorable Minister of Education. While Mrs. Lawrence was speaking, she said, and I quote, "Ask your member Sharma, APNU member, chief member. There are girls under the age of 16 having babies and no one has ever been charged." Mr. Speaker, APNU believes that this is a personal attack on Mr. Jaipal Sharma, a sitting member of the APNU, and we are demanding that the Honorable Minister makes an apology directly to Mr.
Member, I believe that you are within your rights to demand an apology. I also wish to state that there will be no debate on this matter. I know there's another microphone that's gone live. That Mr. Sharma, when he rose, said that his father was being impugned and not himself. That is something that I reviewed, and I had to take note of, that he did not feel that he was the one being impugned, but that it was his father. I believed initially that it was a sitting member of this House, but by Mr. Sharma's own words, he said, "my father," and that is something that I must take cognizance of. Please proceed, Mr. Adams.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc. Reports on committees, oral questions without notice, questions on notice.
Honourable members, if there are any questions, please proceed. Please proceed.
Statements by ministers and human policy statements. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister. Reduction of bills. Public business. Government's business.
Honourable members, we will resume the debate on the 2014 budget. I'm not aware of who will be commencing the budget presentations today, so I invite that person, whoever he or she is, to please start.
I am the retired person, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel, retired Harmon. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Harmon.
Whichever way you want to put it.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the 2014 budget, titled "The Better Guyana for All Guyanese." Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the debate, certain members, the right wing of the government side, the right wing of the government side offered to retire me and then to give me a comfortable room at the Marriott. Well, I just want to say to my dear friends that I do appreciate their concerns to my welfare, but I need no Marriott, and I will not be retired from this seat until such time that people say I should be over there. Mr. Speaker, I have no resources. In fact, all I have to offer the people of this country, the hard-working people of this country, is hard work. And I offer my hard work to the people of this country. But it is to those persons who have the resources of the country to manage and to manage properly, who sometimes in the course of their work improperly manage those resources and sometimes do other things with it, that they're the ones who have to fear that the rooms that they would have might be rooms with a single bunk or a double bunk. Mr. Speaker, since the time allocated to me is a very short one, I will get to the meat of the matter immediately. Mr. Speaker, if indeed my language is not extremely elegant to some other members of the House, I would hope that the House appreciates it, because in my humble view, the people who are the real judge or judges of this debate are the people of this wonderful country. And therefore, I shall be speaking to the people of Guyana in the course of this debate. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I wish to make it one thing very clear. That is that we in the APNU reject the notion that any person or entity can authorize the expenditure from the public purse which is not approved by this National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the 8 years of continuous growth, which is a boast by the government, is little comfort to hard-working people of Guyana. What they know, Mr. Speaker, is that the PPPC has now been in government for over 21 years, and for the vast majority of them, their lives are no better. So please, Dr. Singh, Honorable Member, please recognize your position. You are a part of an administration that have failed to deliver a good life or a better life for all Guyanese. There is no doubt that your policies have created a fabulous life for a small number of them. But for the vast majority of our people, it's a hard life. Mr. Speaker, our friends on the other side of the aisle have made and have been making the case that we should work together. In fact, I was eagerly looking forward to the Honorable Minister Westford leading us in singing the song, "Let Us Cooperate." But she did in fact disappoint me by not singing. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, these noble ideals of cooperation end right here. Outside of this House, Mr. Speaker, it's another world. The world of the PPPC. You confront an uncompromising, contemptuous, and arrogant political machinery which seems to feel that their minority status in the House can be made up by being the proverbial schoolyard bully outside of it. Mr. Speaker, so this budget, like the two previous ones in the 10th Parliament, has an underlying feature, or if you like, a golden thread that runs through it, which says this: never concede anything to the opposition. Stay on course. More of the same. That's the scene in the country. Mr. Speaker, how else does one explain the attitude of the government to initiatives by the opposition? Mr. Speaker, since 2012, in our budget debate, the combined opposition made certain proposals to the government about budget considerations. But what has it done? The government refused to engage in any meaningful budget talks at the tripartite level. The government refused to reduce the toll on the Berbice Harbour Bridge. The government refused to reduce the value-added tax by at least a single %, with the promise by His Excellency the President to look into the tax structure and to establish a tax committee. The government refused to increase old age pension to $15,000 that we were asking for in 2012. The government refused to commission an inquiry into Gaisuco and GPL as a precondition to the grant of any further subventions to these entities. The government refused to guarantee the independence of constitutional entities. Even after a motion was passed in this National Assembly, they continued to refuse to do so. Mr. Speaker, the government refused to give presidential assent to any bills passed in the National Assembly, which the PDP did not support. Mr. Speaker, the government refused to address the issues affecting National Insurance Scheme. They refused to have the monies in NISIL, the Lotto Fund, and the GGMC transferred into the Consolidated Fund. They refused to take action on MCN and GINA. They refused to establish a public procurement commission. Mr. Speaker, all of this within the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, even if we had a modicum of movement on the majority of these measures proposed by the opposition, we could certainly have had a different kind of budget today. And this is what the people of Guyana must know. The problem though, Mr. Speaker, is that the rising tide of unemployment, joblessness, and hopelessness in Guyana has the tendency to create an outcome that will consume us all. No amount of macroeconomic fundamentals and selective use of statistics by my honorable friend, Mr. Ifanali, will change that reality. Mr. Speaker, as a mass-based partnership, the APNU have traveled the length and breadth of this country over the last 2 years. We had the opportunity to look into the eyes of our citizens, and what they say to us was reflected in our speeches and the questions we asked in this National Assembly. So it's quite all right for new members to Joseph Hamilton to refer to an excellent presentation by Mr. Ronald Vulcan as suited to an RDC meeting. Mr. Hamilton, we make an apology for that. That is what you call bringing the business of the people to a forum, which, from all appearances, you are either ill-equipped or unable to do. Mr. Speaker, since the commencement of the 10th Parliament, APNU have consistently said that public infrastructure plays an extremely pivotal role in transforming Guyana. We have consistently stated that we do not believe in the current pattern of development which sees large sums of the people's money being spent on projects which have the appearance of providing jobs for the boys and benefits only a segment of our population. Mr. Speaker, we call for a national conversation on the transportation system of our country, including roads, bridges, airstrips, airports, and waterways. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we repeated a call from the chairman of the Old Airport Inc., calling for a comprehensive, long-term infrastructure development plan to support growth in the economy. Mr. Speaker, since then, we have had meetings of the National Competitiveness Strategy Committee, a component of which made certain recommendations for infrastructure development. The government also sponsored an engineering conference in 2013. But Mr. Speaker, sadly, we see no evidence of these outputs manifesting itself in the major expenditure in this budget. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is that the Honorable Minister and his budget team are locked into a budget matrix set by this government, in which the bulk of the public purse is spent on a few so-called transformational projects. Mr. Speaker, even if the government intended after 8 years of Dr. Ashley Singh's budget team to respond to the calls of the people for change, they simply couldn't do it without causing a budget disaster. So, for example, Mr. Speaker, we are locked into spending on the Mila Falls, even if the investors pulled out. We are locked into spending on the Chadijagan International Airport expansion project, even if the economic reality calls for a change or modification. We are locked into spending on roads, even if the price of the population require a change in priorities. Mr. Speaker, while speakers on the government side extol the virtues of this budget being pro-poor, the reality is that it is not so, and we have more of the same. That is the reality. My colleagues, let's face it, Dr. Singh and his budget team are tired, and they have produced an uninspiring budget. So uninspiring that the Honorable Minister himself in his presentation seemed to have been infected by that tiredness of his team. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for many years of budget presentations. But I am of the opinion, and one which many persons in Guyana share, that this is your worst presentation. And that you should follow that small voice within you, which must be saying, give it up, Ashley. Find another job. Sorry, Ashley. Mr. Speaker, since our 2012 budget presentation, AP has said that the government's spending on public infrastructure has been wrongly prioritized. We believe that public infrastructure must serve human development. So, Mr. Speaker, if we understand that development prerequisite, we can then look at the infrastructure of our country in a different way. Mr. Speaker, since this issue is so important to the future of Guyana, rather than addressing the sums allocated to projects within this sector, I will attempt in this presentation to give an insight into the broad policy approaches in specific areas an AP and new government will adopt in public infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, a more detailed examination of the budget for roads and bridges has been done by my colleague, Ms. Anna Ferguson, and further details of our approach to housing, water, and so on will emerge in our consideration of the estimates. But in a broad sense, Mr. Speaker, in a broad sense, in 2012, the government said it was to invest $11.8 billion on roads and bridges. In fact, they spent $9.4 billion. In 2013, they said they will invest $12.6 billion on roads and bridges, and in fact, they only spent $13.3 billion of that sum. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, we are investing $13.7 billion to improve roads and bridges. And once the partner holds true, the full sum will not be spent. It seems clear, Mr. Speaker, that we have an issue here of either poor planning or poor execution of infrastructure works. Or both. Or is it, Mr. Speaker, that there is a systemic problem in the way government spends in this sector? I refer, Mr. Speaker, to the manner in which responsibility for the construction of roads and bridges are divvied up by the government. The Ministry of Works is generally responsible for public works in Guyana. In this regard, they are provided resources by the state to undertake these works. However, what we find in Guyana, the Ministry of Housing building roads and bridges, the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development building roads and bridges, the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment building roads and bridges, and the Public Works Ministry building roads and bridges. The result, Mr. Speaker, is that in different communities, you get different quality of roads. Contractors are allowed to get away with bad practices, and citizens' complaints are not heeded. Our demand, Mr. Speaker, is that this practice must be put to an end. Make one minister responsible for roads and bridges in Guyana. If Minister Ben can't do it, straighten him out or his ministry. If an APNU government, in an APNU government, this will be a priority. An old Guyanese proverb says, Mr. Speaker, too many cooks spoil the broth. But in this context, we may see too many cooks steal the pot. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that since the commencement of this 10th Parliament, the government has and will spend nearly $34.3 billion on roads and bridges. But is this the true picture, Mr. Speaker? In this year, the Honourable Minister allocates a further $7.7 billion for rural communities and hinterland roads. Mr. Speaker, on page 32 of the Minister's budget speech, he says that $12.7 billion this year in the budget will be spent on roads, among which will be construction of the Porica to Ruby Backdown Road. This opens up access to over 330 farming households, etc. No sooner than that budget is read, we see a notice in the newspaper on the 30th of March 2014, the Chronicle newspaper, calling for expressions of interest for the building of a road from Porica to Ocean by GBMC. What? Are we building one road over the other? Mr. Speaker, if this is a flyover, I would really like to see the design. So we're building one from Porica to Ruby, and one which starts from Porica, flies over Ruby and goes straight to Ocean. All within the same budget period. Mr. Speaker, what APNU advises is to put all the monies to be spent on roads and bridges together from all sources, bring it together. Do a proper assessment and prioritize roads and bridges construction and then hand it to one ministry. Mr. Speaker, to continue in the present vein is to encourage situations as presented by this case at the Moruca Bridge. Mr. Speaker, this is a situation in which a bridge that actually cost $43 million was awarded, the contract was awarded to a contractor. The contractor then did some poor work, but because it was work being supervised by the Ministry of Local Government, the contractor said that this is not poor work, this is good work. This is what he said here in the Saddleback News newspaper dated Tuesday, July 28, 2014. But even though the contractor says this is good work, this is what he says about the project design and the engineering capacity of the ministry. The contractor, whose name I don't know, it's in the papers anyhow, said many of the complications associated with the project, especially those related to the quality of the structure, stems from the inadequacy of the design. This is what he said, the inadequacy of design. So in fact, what the contractor was saying is that, it's not me, blame the government. They give me an inadequate design to build a road or a bridge. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about looking at our citizens in the eye, on Thursday, January 30th, 2014, a team from the APNU visited and spoke directly to the Tushaw of that community, Basil Cornelius. And the photograph is there. We're looking straight in the eyes of Mr. Cornelius. And this is what Mr. Cornelius said. He spoke of what was called favoritism by the regional officials in granting of numerous contracts to a single individual or a selected few. Even after the community had complained about the quality of work, the contractor was paid his money. In fact, he was paid $28 million in the first instance, and there was a sum of $15 million which was held so that they will be satisfied that the work is completed. And even though the Minister Whittaker, went in there and expressed his concerns, as he quite rightly did, about the quality of work on this bridge, and basically made certain statements that he will take action against the contractor has been paid his full sum of money. Mr. Speaker, our two major bridges require some special comment. That is to say, the Demerara Harbour Bridge and the Berbice River Bridge. Before that, however, Mr. Speaker, the Minister in his speech on page 33, paragraph 4.52, says, our government has collaborated with the Surinamese government for the construction of the bridge over the Corteen River. Resources are budgeted to prepare the bridge terminal. Yet, Mr. Speaker, agreements with a foreign state are reached. An unspecified amount is budgeted. Work is to commence soon, and the Minister has not yet provided the details of this transaction to the National Assembly. This is a clear example, Mr. Speaker, of the contempt which the Honorable Minister and his budget team treats with the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, we will have to demand that the Minister gets it right. Mr. Speaker, the volume of traffic on the Demerara Harbour Bridge and the Berbice River Bridge requires separate attention. In this budget, the Minister allocates $338 million for critical works to extend the life of the Demerara Harbour Bridge. Mr. Speaker, we are aware of the condition of the Demerara Harbour Bridge. And the staff of the Demerara Harbour Bridge, under Mr. Adams, must be congratulated for keeping that bridge afloat. My dear colleague and friend, Mr. Irfan Ali, traverses there on a daily basis, and I'm sure that might have been one of the motivations to ensure that the bridge stays afloat. Mr. Speaker, time has run out on that bridge. And the regular patching will not extend the life of it for any significant period, given the volume and weight of the traffic on it on a daily basis. I am advised that on a daily basis, at least 17,000 vehicles traverse that bridge on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, we urge the government to expedite the work on the new bridge. we urge you to expedite the work on the new bridge. In fact, last year, in our budget presentation, we said that we support a new bridge. So we're asking you this year to expedite the work on it. But we have to have one caveat. That what we should have established, Mr. Speaker, is a bridge authority which will deal with all issues related to this bridge. So in this regard, Mr. Speaker, what we are saying, we do not want Mr. Winston Brassiton on this bridge. Mr. Speaker, what we are saying, we do not want NISIL on this bridge. We want a bridge authority that will be able to handle all matters except those, that individual and that entity. Mr. Speaker, this is the APNU's recommendation on the matter. The Berbice River Bridge. Mr. Speaker, the toll on this bridge has been a drag on the citizens of Guyana. But more particularly, the citizens of Berbice, who are forced to cross the bridge on a regular basis. Mr. Speaker, if ever there was needed a clear demonstration of the callousness of this government, it is the way in which it has dealt with the needs of the people there in Berbice. And here is one example. Mr. Speaker, after taking millions of dollars of money from the National Insurance Scheme, the nation's social safety net, to invest in the Berbice Bridge, the comrades on the other side of this house, by themselves, their servants, agents, or assignees, allowed the Berbice Bridge Company to set a toll which can only be seen as taking from the poor to give to the rich. Yeah. What I call Robin Hood reverse. This government, Mr. Speaker, has further facilitated a deferral of the payment of dividends to the NIS in preference to other shareholders in the bridge company. In the face of this assault on the people of Guyana, but the people in Berbice more particularly, Mr. Speaker, the government was either compliant or complacent. The current toll for the bridge which was set, Mr. Speaker, is as follows. Motor cars, $2,200. Minibuses, $2,200. Motorcycles, $200. Four-wheel vehicles, $4,000. SUVs and pickups pulling a boat for recreational activities, $4,000, and it goes on. Mr. Speaker, in recognition that the toll was too high, the Berbice Bridge Company, Inc., for a specific period, over August 1st, 2013 to August 12th, 2013, reduced the toll for the crossing of the bridge to the following rates. Four-wheel drive vehicles, SUVs, from $4,000 to $3,000. SUVs, pickup pulling a boat for recreational purposes, $4,000 to $3,000. Four-wheel drive SUVs, pickup pulling horse buggies, $4,000 to $3,000. Four-wheel drive pickup transporting barbecue grills and so on, $4,000 to $3,000. 50-seater buses, $12,800 to $9,000. 30-seater buses, $7,200 to $6,000. Large trucks, $13,600 to $10,000. Mr. Speaker, this reduction coincided with the PBBC Congress in Berbice and only catered for the large vehicles which are used to bus and truck PBB supporters from one event to the other. How selfish. This is the PBBC that speaks about being a pro-poor government. This is the government that speaks about being pro-poor. Mr. Speaker, by a motion filed in this House by APNU, we haven't heard the cries of the people of Berbice for lowering of the toll to ease the burden on them, filed a motion in this National Assembly. We trust that the ebullient minister, the ebullient member from Berbice, the honourable member Mr. Jafar Ali, will for one moment in his life stand on the side of the poor people and support the motion when it comes to the floor for debate.
One member, you require an extension of 15 minutes. Mr. Williams or
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the honourable member be granted an additional 15 minutes to continue.
Thank you, please, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what APND proposes is not a reduction in the big vehicles and the SUVs and so on. Our proposal is to reduce the toll for vehicles which carry the ordinary people, the small man, the poor. We are seeking a reduction in motor cars from $2,200 to $1,000. Minibuses from $2,200 to $1,000. We believe that motorcycles, which are poor people's vehicles, should be traveling free. The SUVs, pickups, 4,000 to 3,000. But then the other bigger vehicles and so on, we leave that alone. We are dealing with the poor man, the small man, and these things here. Mr. Speaker, that is basically our position on these bridges. I now turn to water transport. And I must state, please, Mr. Speaker, that I believe that the honourable member, Mr. Robeson-Bell, must have had a peep of my presentation and produced in the Kaiser News of today an artist's impression of a floating ramp. Well, that history I want to address you because I believe Minister Bell might have had a sneak preview of my presentation. I probably the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs did anything on my phone. Mr. Speaker, I must say that the population which we have, dwindling though it might be, is a very mobile population. This has been the result of the building of new communities, in housing communities, which we acknowledge, that's a fact. That's a fact, building of communities. But while these communities have been built, Mr. Speaker, the major centers of business and employment has largely remained static. In addition, please, Mr. Speaker, the increasing number of persons who seek a livelihood or to live in the hinterland of Guyana has placed a greater reliance and stress on the roadways, waterways, and airstrips. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, our budgetary allocations have not taken note of this reality. So while the government boasts of the number of cars on the road as an indicator of development, what we have is a crumbling, deteriorating infrastructure to cater to the need of that change. Mr. Speaker, on any day, if you were to stand at the Guadeloupe stellium, the Georgetown stellium, the Porica stellium, the Supernam stellium, or the Charity stellium, you will see the vast numbers of citizens who utilize these speedboats to get to their places of work, school, and business. And these wharves, Mr. Speaker, the landing facilities are ancient and in many cases dangerous. No provision is made for the physically challenged among us. Old and infirm persons are not considered. Sanitary facilities are non-existent. Mr. Speaker, if we are concerned about Guyana citizens, the poor people, this must be seen as a priority. Mr. Speaker, the account of a member of the Porica Speedboat Owners Association last Sunday, when the leader of the opposition and his team were there traveling to Bartica, echoed some statements made by Mr. Stephen Bell several months earlier on the condition of the mooring at Porica. And the gentleman spoke to us, said that the members of the association are frustrated over the docking arrangements and the decaying Porica stellium. He said that it's inadequate for the daily traffic that leaves there and vulnerable to damages by waves and passing vessels. This place, he said, is way too congested. That's the present situation this war. He explained that speedboat operators of Bartica, Supernam, Degwan, and Wakenham all vying for space to that stellium, where a single set of stairs serve as the gangway onto the boats. So what happens sometimes, Mr. Speaker, is that a person, because of this confusion, you might be intending to go to Bartica and end up at Supernam. So that is the reality. Sometimes people don't recognize what is happening until they get to the wrong destination, and you got to be brought back. Ask Stephen Beck, he will tell you. Mr. Speaker, Transport and Harbors Minister Mr. Robson Ben, now arriving, stated that breakers will have been installed to help deal with the wave since last year. This development is not materialized. Yes, breakers to waves. Mr. Ben knows about it. Mr. Speaker, you take a trip to these tenants and see the conditions. But Mr. Speaker, I must caution you that if you take your wife, tell her to avoid a shoe with narrow heels, since that is an invitation to a sprained ankle or broken feet. Mr. Speaker, if we accept a minimum of 15 passengers in these 300 boats that land there on a daily basis, we are talking about 4,500 persons at that one place on a daily basis. The Transport and Harbors Department, Mr. Speaker, in January 2013, said that they were directing efforts to the construction of floating ramps to accommodate speedboats in Parika, Breeden Loop, and Georgetown Stelling. Of course, no mention is made of Supernam or Charity. Even so, Mr. Speaker, nothing was done in 2013. Now, in March 2014, the Honourable Minister said that the engineers in his ministry are studying the designs. And by a strange twist of fate, by coincidence, today we see an artist's impression of what this ramp would look like. Mr. Speaker, in the budget 2014, the government allocates $62 million for the rehabilitation of Stellings at Parika, Legwan, Wakenham, and Supernam. However, even from a visual survey of those Stellings, it would appear to the naked eye, to the common man, that this is inadequate to the task, because work is so much to be done here. There appears to be, Mr. Speaker, no allocation for speedboat terminals. Not just ramps, Mr. Speaker, speedboat terminals. Mr. Speaker, I have some friends who like to compare us to Trinidad and so on. And my dear honorable friend, Mr. Ali, he loves to make comparisons. I say to you, Minister, compare the landing facilities for water taxis in Trinidad, at Port of Spain and San Fernando, or Port of Spain to Tobago, and compare that to those at Parika and Bartica. Then tell me what your statistics say. Also, please use photographs when you make your presentations. Mr. Speaker, many of the members of this House who so aggressively represent the people of the islands of Wakenham and Legwan carefully navigate their way on these rotten boards of Parika. Where is the concern for the poor people? To thine own self be true. Mr. Speaker, during the 10th Parliament, we passed certain motions calling on the government to set up inquiries into riverine accidents. We also passed a motion seeking the reintroduction of the ferry on the Berbice River. Mr. Speaker, we expect that government will act in accordance with the resolutions of those motions. As failing to do so, the Guyanese people will judge you harshly, and they will not be able to wait too long on an APNU government to correct the mess. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the airstrips, we have seen an increase in the persons traveling to the hinterland to live and to earn a livelihood. Mr. Speaker, the APNU says this, that we must have at least one municipal type airport in regions 1, 7, 8, and 9. We believe that it is time that the development of our country be put on such a footing. These municipal airports, Mr. Speaker, must have proper lights, proper airstrip facilities, terminal buildings with proper lavatory, restrooms, and other facilities. That is what we mean by a municipal type airport. Mr. Speaker, this budget allocates $185 million for works to be done at Matthews Ridge, Port Kaituma, Cameron, and Mbaimalai airstrips. This is clearly an inadequate sum. Mr. Speaker, we have 160 airstrips in this country, of which 72 of these airstrips are government owned. How many of these airstrips are served by the government? Mr. Speaker, as our people venture out more and more into the vast hinterland, our focus on these airstrips will have to be intensified. Mr. Speaker, there are too many accidents involving aircraft in our hinterland. And our weakness in search and rescue has been well documented in the public domain by Captain Jerry Govaya. Mr. Speaker, Captain Govaya makes the point that we must have an agency which coordinates search and rescue, and suggests that these entities that deals with search and rescue, air, maritime, and disaster preparedness should be all under one agency. And he recommends that the Civil Defense Commission, since it already has the capacity, might be the right place to do it. Mr. Speaker, that is a recommendation which we support. We support that recommendation by Captain Govaya. The issues related to safety in the sector, Mr. Speaker, we are told should be addressed in 2014. And a clarion call has been made by the chairman of the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority, Mr. Hugh Denbo, in this regard. Mr. Speaker, according to the chairman of the GCAA, he says some of the challenges which the body recognizes existing locally includes Guyana's ability to respond to issues which deal with aviation safety, air traffic management, economic regulations for both domestic and international operations, reliable and adequate air transportation services, aviation security, and the modernization of airport facilities. He said Guyana is faced with the challenge of the need to strengthen institutional capacity, and most importantly, to recruit additional staff and provide specialized and relevant training for current qualified staff. Mr. Speaker, it was in the newspaper, it was in the information in the public domain, that we had the other day a member of some staff from the traffic control left their post when an aircraft was about to land. Now, I understand an investigation is taking place and some persons might have been suspended or otherwise. But the story goes deeper than that, please, Mr. Speaker. We have a shortage of this type of staff that we need in this very critical area. And yet I do not see in this budget any allocation to deal with this very critical issue. Mr. Speaker, these are urgent priorities of the time. And they must take precedence over pumping the bulk of the allocation in the sector to the Chedijagan International Airport expansion project. These are important and urgent matters. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the speedboat operations, the floating ramps, what we say is that the money you have allocated to Milo Falls, where the investor is not yet known, and from the newspaper's report I see that the President said we're trying to hold Site Global. Let us use the money now and fix those ramps. Give it to Mr. Minister Ben and let him fix the ramps. Yes. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, our position on infrastructure issues in this budget are as follows. 1. The Milo Falls. APNU recommended a hydro power authority which will review and decide on all matters with respect to the Milo Falls. We said that last year. This must include the environmental assessment done by the IADB. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of the above and a clear identification of the investment partner, we shall be obliged to withhold our support for the allocation of funds. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the CJIA expansion, what we are saying is that we must have the full details of this project with all the amendments, that must be made available to the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, as a precondition, the issue of the residents of Timehri North must be settled. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the Demerara Harbour Bridge, we say establish a Harbour Bridge Authority. Take NISIL, President Jack Dio, and Mr. Winston Brassington out of this project. Mr. Speaker, the Quarantine River Bridge, we demand full disclosure of this contract before we can allocate any money to it. Mr. Speaker, we are saying that we must increase the allocations for construction of facilities for speedboats and utilize the money from the Mile Falls to fix that situation now. We cannot postpone that anymore, Minister, like we're postponing the local government elections for all these years. Mr. Speaker, finally what we are saying is that we must consolidate the building of roads and bridges under the Ministry of Works and Transport. Put the resources and the money there. Cut the fat and spreading the wealth for the friends of the administration and ensure that we have proper work done in the infrastructure sector. Yes, you, Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, with those statements, I wish to say that the budget in its present form, and unless these issues that we have raised are addressed, we will be obliged not to be able to support it in total. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I invite our Minister of Marine Affairs,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to congratulate the Minister of Finance, Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh, and his dedicated team of planners and drafters from the Ministry of Finance for once again putting together the annual budget for 2014. I wish to recognize that the 220 billion budget offers allocation of funds for the economic and productive sectors, which will further stimulate growth and expansion of our economy and will complement the progress established over the years under the PPP Civic government. The budget also offers a practical set of measures that place much emphasis on meeting the needs of the people, including women, youth, Amerindians, and safety net support for vulnerable groups, including pensioners, children, single parents. Budget 2014 is a true reflection of the People's Progressive Party Civic, delivering on its manifesto commitments to the Guyanese people. Be reminded, lest we forget, that the architect for 2 decades of transformative achievements and success is the people. Mr. Speaker, recalling the late leader, Dr. Jagan's objective for putting people at the center of development, I wish to applaud the current government for its foresight and investment and the continued confidence they have placed in the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs to execute the programs and projects that bring greater levels of support to the Amerindian development, when there was little or no consideration for hinterland and Amerindian development, which, as we know, resulted in wide gaps in basic social services, which greatly hampered the well-being of the Amerindian population. This story should continue to be repeated of how our Amerindian brothers and sisters were left out in the wilderness, in the cold, marginalized and maligned, neglected. However, the new success story must also be told of how over the last 2 decades, amidst a tight financial base, the People's Progressive Party civic government took on the task of correcting the wrongs, filling the gaps, and supporting the developmental needs of the Amerindian population. Mr. Speaker, over the most recent years, government intervention and support to Amerindian development continue to make positive impact on the well-being of the more than 70,000 Amerindian residents. This is not to say that there is nothing more to address regarding Guyana's indigenous people. Far from it. The transition of Amerindian village economy is an ongoing process. The granting of land titles continue to progress. The need for increased access to secondary education continue to be addressed. Improving and expanding health care and water access is an ongoing project for this government. The empowering of Amerindian youth is spiraling. The cultural integration and development has been strengthened. Mr. Speaker, Amerindian leaders are refining their governance and administration skills. They have developed well-defined goals for sustainable approaches for village development. And of course, this was all made possible in a conducive environment created, established, and supported by the People's Progressive Party civic government. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in Parliament, the concern of Amerindian students not having access to quality education was raised from the opposition benches.
That's true.
However, this is far from reality. We can recall, Mr. Speaker, the CPC under the PNC days. The enrollment of Amerindian teachers, and just teachers, were so minimal, very minimal. The hinterland schools depended mostly on coastland teachers, who of course gave their best. Since the PPP Civic took office, there has been a complete turnaround. Mr. Speaker, today, if you visit the hinterland and you go to the nursery, primary, and even the 12 or 13 secondary schools, which have been refurbished, rebuilt, and established by this government, the majority of those manning, administrating, and delivering education are Amerindian teachers. Mr. Speaker, may I add that one example, Martha George, a student of the Warramadam Secondary School, who received quality education under this government, has successfully finished her medical degree in Cuba and has returned earlier this year to serve. Isn't this an evidence of equity towards access to quality education that the PPP civic government has pioneered? Even the Honorable Member Hastings, who sits on the opposite side is a beneficiary of safe, quality education. And I would like to congratulate her for remaining in the sector to serve her people. Let me underscore that over the last 20 years, the Hinterland Scholarship Program has produced more than 70,000 Hinterland students. And in 2014, Region 7 registered the second highest number of such students in the program. Isn't that access to quality and equitable education? The total investment in this program for the last 5 years amounts to more than 350 million. This year, 2014, an estimated 470 students will benefit from the allocation of $66.6 million as proposed by the budget. And I await to see the outcome of the approval of the estimates. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, I wish to say that there are other related educational opportunities for Hinterland and Amerindian students. We must recall and we must also repeat that there is the school feeding program, the SNAP program, the National School Uniform program, and of course, the grant which is proposed in this year's budget. A grant which will see support of $10,000 per child from each family to benefit. Mr. Speaker, when we add this up for the Hinterland, $10,000 by 30,000 students, Hinterland students, it is a whopping $300 million more investment in the educational opportunities for Amerindian and Hinterland students. Mr. Speaker, addressing the criticism made by Honorable Dr. George Norton on the failure of the primary health care system in Amerindian communities, I wish to recognize that there are challenges, but I hasten to posit also that this government continues to offer services to Hinterland and Amerindian patients. Over the last 5 years, an estimated 7,000 patients received subsidized associated medical support, free meals and accommodation, free medical supplies, transportation, post-operation treatment and patient care from the program administered by the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs at the Amerindian Princess Street residence. Mr. Speaker, this enhances and complements the healthcare services available in the Hinterland. Agricultural and food security continue to expand in Amerindian communities. The agricultural support received by villagers is now unprecedented to what obtained prior to 1992. Mr. Speaker, 33 tractors, trailers, agricultural implements consisting of plow and harrow were provided to farmers to address increased cultivation, transport, and marketing of produce so as to sustain increased production, thus improving community food security and income generation. The assertion which was made yesterday by the honorable member of the opposite side that the Upper Masruni agricultural potential is not being supported, I strongly beg to differ, because the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs has distributed tractor and agricultural implement to Omanique, Imbamadai, Kaikan, Kurima to assist in their agricultural drive. What is wrong with the opposition? I'm advised by some of my friends to ask the question, is your vision infected with cataract? Mr. Speaker, let us turn to road infrastructure development. Mr. Speaker, I've been advised. Mr. Speaker, road infrastructure development continues to to go apace. This year, Mr. Speaker, the budget is $2 billion, targeting the main hinterland roadways. Mr. Speaker, many of the opposition benches or members from the opposition benches have said that they have traveled the length and breadth of the hinterland. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that they could only have done that because it was this government who have instituted hinterland road program, making it possible for you to travel throughout the length and breadth of the hinterland. Mr. Speaker, I admit that this government has much more to do with respect to the road networks in the hinterland. And so too, they have to do with the airstrips, maintenance, and also constructions and expansion. And Mr. Speaker, of course, we could have done much better with airstrip maintenance and construction if last year the opposition did not seek to cut the budget on that program. Mr. Speaker, household solar unit distribution. For the first time in the history of Guyana, Jumbie lamps are extinguished. As we speak, Amerindian residents have benefited from the distribution of more than 10,858 solar home unit systems, providing innumerable benefits to our people, including students who can now study in the comfort of their home later in the evening. Mr. Speaker, this program also offered training for installations of these home system units to more than 300 young people of the hinterland. Mr. Speaker, river and land transportation investments. The lifeline of Amerindian people hinges on their mobility. The government of Guyana continues to invest heavily in river and land transport to reach many of the far-flung villages in the hinterland. In the last 5 years, land and water transport program totaled a huge $376.2 million investment. These investments, Mr. Speaker, resulted in the distribution of 53 ATVs, 25 minibuses, 17 4x4 pickup, 65 boats, and 107 engines. Much needed to boost the transportational needs of our people who reside in the hinterland. Mr. Speaker, the presidential grant. The presidential grant, Mr. Speaker, offered investment funds for Amerindian communities to invest in productive and economic ventures. Mr. Speaker, this grant financed various income-generating and social development projects that enhance the livelihood options for the people of the hinterland. Projects implemented including, of course, transportation services for the community, construction and stocking of community shops, construction and furnishing of guest houses and multi-purpose centers, agricultural projects including cattle rearing, poultry rearing, beekeeping, the building of bridges, installation and improvement of communication systems, tourism projects. Mr. Speaker, of course, we must recall also and record that such projects that are currently being implemented should have been implemented prior to December to March. We could remember last year that the president's budget was cut to a mere $1, and of course the Amerindian villages have to wait more than 2 years for the presidential grant 2011 and 2012. I now turn to the low carbon development strategy. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the importance of this strategy, which guides this country to sustainably utilize their forest resources, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs continues to play a leading role in the LCDS public awareness and consultation activities. Ongoing awareness program and update activities continue to engage the Amerindian population in explaining the impacts and benefits and the level of implementation derived out of this national strategy. And I'm very happy to report that on the signing of the agreement between the government of Guyana and the Kingdom of Norway, Amerindians are the first beneficiary of this LCDS initiative. Amerindian benefited from $60 million under this MOU. $6 million is allocated for projects that will see economic transformation of their villages and communities throughout the creation of low carbon and environmentally friendly projects, thereby creating jobs for our people within their communities. Today, Mr. Speaker, Amerindians are blazing the trail with respect to developing a green economy in this country. Over the next 3 years, 166 villages and communities will directly benefit from an investment fund totaling $6 million Of course, we have already notified this nation that 26 such projects are at various stages of implementation, and these include agriculture, aquaculture, ecotourism, logging, village enterprises, just to mention a few. Mr. Speaker, the government, the People's Progressive Party civic government, continue to focus and keep on their agenda the titling and demarcation of lands for Amerindians, and it remains a priority. Reflecting on the PPP Civic Election Manifesto since last Congress, major support for land rights and tenure security were recorded, borne out by the fact that after such reaffirmation in that Congress,